Pastor Scott and I were kind of talking about, we were reviewing the content of the last 3 weeks, and I really wanted to make this last week something that would be somewhat culminating. And also, it is my hope that we have a few minutes at the end, at least, because I really, really, really find your input very life-giving to me, to hear what you learned and how you took what we've talked about and what you're going to do with it when you go home with your own loved ones. So we'll just go from there. I wanted to start by just kind of circling back to our first lesson together, which is that connection starts at home. And the foundations of attachment, of course, come in the parent-child relationship, and that we learn so much about who we are as children of God and as special, precious, important people through those primary relationships. And then the interesting thing is whatever we learn from there, we sort of co-opt into our other relationships throughout the world. But really a lot of, if you think of sort of the time that we spend in the home, and then you move forward into the time that we spend in the rest of the world, with all of these multiple relationships we have elsewhere, we spend a lot of time with other relationships, sort of building on who we learned we were fundamentally from the home. And so what I think would be kind of cool to do today is sort of take that and talk about how we can grow together in our communities outside of the home. See, the way I kind of see it is we all bring with us all of these elements of identity that started in the home relationship, and then we mesh together in communities. And specifically today, we'll be talking a little bit about church communities and how we can sort of recognize our brokenness and the best efforts of those who love us most, our attachment figures, owing to the fact that they're not going to get it perfect, and we as parents aren't going to get it perfect either. And then we come to church, and then we have to deal with each other, with all of our stuff, right? And so that's let's go to the next slide. That's kind of, I found this and I thought this was a lot of fun. It says church is not something you go to, it's a family you belong to. And so if that is our paradigm, we recognize that we are all working together in community to try to help one another become healed, become more the body of Christ. And I thought about this a lot this week as I was preparing my thoughts and praying about them and really trying to do God's will in the work that I'm going in my time with you today. And I remembered I've done quite a little bit of speaking to folks who in this area around mental health and family relationships. And I remember one person asking me one time, how do I help somebody who is struggling in a way that I just really can't relate to? Say, for example, I've never been, on the brink of having my lights turned off, or I've never suffered with obsessive compulsive disorder, or something like that. How do I relate to somebody when I just don't simply share their struggle? And I gave an answer, but I don't think I gave a very good answer, which is always nice in some ways, because then you go home and then you think for 4 days about it, what should have I said? What is the right answer to that? Because I think we all do that. We don't exactly all share the same struggles, but we all share this fact that we all do struggle. So as I started thinking about that, I thought, the people in my world, there are those who struggle with, a death of a spouse or a child, or there are those who wish that they had a family, that they wish to be married and kind of have a traditional family, and that hasn't happened to them, or they struggle with mental illness issues. A dear friend of mine, her husband committed suicide, and she's a single mom. There are those who wish they could give birth to children, and that's not something that's possible. Or those who are transitioning out of parenthood, or living with addiction, or love those who struggle with addiction. Or, there's just in this room, we are a room of people who have deep struggle, every one of us. And we all don't always know what each of us are struggling with, and there may be a time where we feel like nobody really gets what I'm struggling with, and we start to feel very, very alone. And so that, as I was thinking about all of these sort of situations of the human condition, that make us feel separate and make us feel like nobody gets us. That would have been my answer that I would have given that friend. And I want to what I want to talk about is two things that we as communities of believers can do better at, and that I particularly try hard to do better at myself. What I would have said to that friend is, do your very best to not let anybody suffer and struggle alone. That is our joint ministry. I don't even know how to pronounce this name, but this is something I think about clinically all the time. And I think about in my own struggles, that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And the difference there is in whether we suffer or whether we are feeling that pain in isolation or in community. That we live in a fallen world, and so we are going to experience pain of all of those different kinds, and I didn't even think of them all. I didn't mention all of them. I just kind of thought of some of them or some that have touched me personally. That we will feel pain, and suffering comes when we don't feel like anybody understands us, when we feel like we're doing this alone. Oftentimes those who have struggled with a lot of trauma, some pretty intense trauma, one example that is very clear through the research is rape, which is that those who report back their struggles with rape talk often about the fact that the incident itself was horrible, but the trauma actually comes more deeply when they were not believed afterwards, or they were not supported, and they felt as if they were alone. That to me is mind-blowing, considering the intensity of an experience itself, is that what we do after we have been hurt or we have been exposed to horrible things, if we can reach around people and gather them towards us in community, makes all the difference. My husband and I just returned with our kids on a summer vacation to Washington, D.C., and this, of course, is always this kind of content is always on my mind. It's very close to my heart, so I'm thinking about it and incorporating it into what I'm thinking, my quiet moments of contemplation. And I was really interested in this idea of solitude as opposed to isolation and community as we were touring around DC, and it occurred to me something very, very interesting. If you look at the struggle, the deep societal struggle around those who suffered as a consequence of the Vietnam War, that's a population of deeply injured, wounded people. We all know that. And as I thought about it, and I've done some reading and study about it, it occurred to me that a lot of the reason why their struggle happens to be particularly poignant and intense is because they were a community that they weren't supported when they got home. They were not welcomed with open arms. They were not celebrated. They felt very alone. They didn't come and go in battalions and troops. They came and left individually. And then they came home to sort of figure it out by themselves. And if you can contrast that to another experience I had in D.C. in our touring, another population of people who struggled and suffered intensely is the Holocaust victims, who I don't want to downplay the way they struggled and even the way they recovered, but they recovered in community. They had people from all the way through, if you listen to the stories of those who went through this, because of the community around their faith. And there was a strength and a depth of togetherness that helped them to where these two populations have recovered as the generations have passed in very, very different ways, feeling a lot of pain, and rightfully so. They both went through horrible experiences, but the difference is isolation as opposed to healing and community. So I want to take that to. So this speaks just a little bit to, okay, let me just throw this in here really quick. Next slide. The roots of resilience are to be found in a sense of being understood by and existing in the mind and the heart of a loving, attuned, and self-possessed other. And so that's where we as a community can remember that resilience happens, this ability that we each have that God gave us. The help is already inside of us. We're not creating something that was never there. When we're recovering from struggle in community, we're just bringing that out in each other. And I really, really like to look at everyone that I see from that paradigm, that we're not creating something that wasn't there. We're just bringing that out in them. And we find that through the healing relationships that each of us have the capacity to do. This is not like a therapist thing. It's not even like a pastor thing. Sorry, pastor's good. I'm just kidding. It's not, right? I mean, we have the capacity to bring about healing and self-righting because that's how God made us. And so I love that. And I want to just think about, okay, so not letting people feel alone is my first point. And I want to just share with you a little bit that the reason why I feel very, very deeply about this. And I want to take you back to a personal experience of mine from long ago. So when I was in college, my parents were going through a divorce. And it was one of those things where it had kind of been culminating for many years, and it finally kind of happened right there in those quite developmentally important, precarious launching years. I'd just moved out, and I was quite avoidantly attached. So quite honestly, it didn't really impact me very much. It was fine. Like, who needed parents? Like that kind of unhealthy. But it was a big deal, looking back. I realized that I didn't have a support system, and my community, roommates, church, family, even extended family, I think in the spirit of not knowing what to say, they didn't really say anything. And it's an awkward thing. I mean, I get that. It's uncomfortable. You don't know what to say. You can't fix someone's pain. There's a lot of times where we just don't have the right words. And so consequently, I walked about this period of my life very alone. And I feel like I kind of looked like that girl up top. I dated a lot. I was getting good grades. I was having sort of a superficially lovely college experience, but I was feeling, again in retrospect, as I have matured and had the courage and the support to reflect upon my life, I was suffering from quite a great deal of anxiety, hiding it quite well. But I was living in a world that was very lonely. And as time went by, and I was able to learn more about myself and have the courage to look at my own story, one thing came out of that. Well, a lot of things came out of that, but one thing very powerfully came out of that, which was this, is I will never see somebody struggling and say nothing. I will walk up to them, and I will be very clunky and awkward and probably maybe say the wrong thing, but I will do my very best to help them feel as if I want to at least be near them and understand that they are not alone. So I was inspired. It was only just about maybe maybe a little more than that, maybe 10 years ago. I got a random note from my roommate from college. We've lost touch, but because of Facebook, there's that way that we can sort of reconnect and things like that. She wrote me a note and said, "Dear Valerie, I've been thinking about you, and I just want to say I'm sorry. While we were roommates at college, you were going through a very, very difficult time, and I didn't have the courage to come and talk to you and put my arm around you and be with you in your struggle. And it's taken me many years," and I don't remember exactly what she said, but basically it had taken her many years to come to the maturity and the realization that she wished she could have walked by me and helped me not be alone. And so, of course, this touched me deeply and reconfirmed to me my commitment that no matter what the struggle is, even if I don't relate personally, I will have the courage to not let someone be alone. Now, this opportunity came to me just a little while after I got that letter. Next slide. As I was given the opportunity in my own church community to be the president of a women's organization of about 120 women, and I was in my early 30s. I was not experienced. I didn't have. I spent the entire time doing that responsibility wondering why in the world I had been asked to do this, because I felt very ill-equipped. And I remember getting a phone call one day that one of the women in my congregation's son, who was serving in Iraq, had been in a Hummer, and he was the medic, and they had been hit by a roadside bomb, and he was in really bad shape. Mind you, I had a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. I was a very young mom. I was very inexperienced, and immediately my thoughts are, can I write her a note? Like, can I send her a cake? I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say, and yet I came back to this idea of she's in struggle. And anything that I do is better than nothing. And so I dug deep, and I got in my car and I drove to her home, and I sat with her and we cried together. And she was terrified. She didn't know. All she knew was this very, very little minimal information. She didn't know what was going to happen and if he was going to be okay. And but I remember the sacredness of that moment, of not shying away from being with her in her struggle, even though I did not truly understand what it was like to have a grown son in Iraq, in a hospital, having been terribly injured in a bomb. But that early experience in my own life taught me on some level how to be in a community and feel others' pain. All right. So my number one point is, please let's not let each other be alone, even if we're not exactly where, understanding, or at least our experiences may be different. My second point that I want to spend just a few minutes on is that true human connection requires empathy, which we've spent some time on. Empathy is a big deal. But it also requires some degree of vulnerability, that we need to allow ourselves to show up. We need to allow ourselves to be seen. And I think this is really a big deal in church communities, because I think there's this one, at least this is my perception, I guess I'm just speaking from my own observations as I get to go about different church communities, that I think sometimes it feels very tempting to feel like we all just need to show up and look super put together. Like that's like, I can't show up and be messy, because I'm a believer and I'm trying to do my best, and if we're doing our best, then it should be playing out in the way everybody behaves and looks, and you kind of look around and think, man, if you're not feeling that way, you look around and think, man, everybody's so put together, like, holy cow, I just, I don't feel like I fit, and so I think that's something that's important to think about, is like, once again, we are all sitting here working through our own private journeys of struggle. And it's okay to show up and be real and to be who we are. Because I think what happens is this: if we don't let ourselves be seen very much, we might communicate a couple of different things. Go ahead and go to the next slide. One of them is this. We might communicate, your struggles make me uncomfortable, and I can't relate to you. Now, we all know what it feels like when we show up and we share something, and everybody just goes, whoa, like, that must be really bad. Like, that idea of, like, I don't get you. And what do we do immediately when that happens, in this kind of a setting or anywhere, even if you're, going to coffee with a friend or whatever. Like, immediately we kind of clam up. Like, we're just like, okay, never mind. Like, we don't feel seen. We don't feel understood. And so we certainly don't feel safe enough to show up and then, like, work together to find that healing that only we in community can find together. The next thing that could happen, that may happen when we kind of, put up the stop sign, is we may be communicating on a slightly deeper level. I see your struggle, but your struggle scares me because I recognize that I too have struggles, and your struggles make me feel uncomfortable about my struggles. So the first piece is I don't even have any. I don't want to go there. The second one is I have some, but I'm not super comfortable dealing with these things. And so, again, but the impact of that is it's a push away. It's not a come near me. Like, let's do this thing together. Let's find healing together through relationship, which is exactly why we meet in community. Why we meet together to vulnerably try to sort of be real, show up, and find healing through relationship. Okay, so what we're shooting for is the next thing, which is showing up and being vulnerable. I see your struggle. I understand it because I have my own struggles. My pain may not look exactly like yours, but it doesn't frighten me. My unique suffering has made me more equipped to see yours. And I want to stay near you so that neither of us have to feel the worst of all things, which is to struggle and to be alone in that struggle. That really is it right there. Like, that is what God wants us to do. He wants us to show up and be able to, like, lift one another and work together and not be fearful that whatever we're experiencing just certainly is either too big or too different than what anybody else is experiencing. So I'm thinking about this is one of my Thornton Wilder produced a one-act play called The Angel That Troubled the Waters. He took it from the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. And what it's about, I mean, you're probably familiar with that, but just to kind of play out the way he articulated it in this play, it's about a physician who comes to the pool of Bethesda, and he keeps trying to get to the waters because he has something that is very painful for him that he's trying to overcome, and he keeps having struggles getting to the water. He cannot find himself, he can't get there. And finally, as this play goes on, an angel physically blocks his way. And he's like, are you kidding me? I'm here, I want to get better, I'm in tons of pain, I just want to get better. I want this to go away. And the angel says this, without your wound, where would your power be? It is your very remorse that makes your low voice tremble into the hearts of men. The very angels themselves cannot persuade the wretched and blundering children on earth, as can one human being broken on the wheels of living. In love's service, only the wounded soldiers can serve. Now draw back. That is beautiful. And that gives our struggles meaning. It doesn't make them right, but it makes them sacred. And it gives us the power to then turn around and be healers in God's name. That we can take our struggles and our hurts and we can use them because only the wounded soldiers have the power to heal. And I'm reminded of this all the time, that I am drawn to people who have the courage to show up and to show how they are wounded soldiers and to relate to me from their own place of brokenness. I was just recently working with a young man who clinically comes to my private practice, and I say this about all of them, but it's true about all of them. I love this kid with all of my heart. He's overcoming in a beautiful way some sexual addiction issues, and we've really come to love one another, and I've worked really hard with him. And just a week or two ago, we were talking about the power that this young man has. He's 18 years old. He just graduated from high school. His addiction and history started at about 14, 15. And I said to him, you have a unique gift that for the rest of your life, as you approach and are confronted with young men who struggle with sexual addiction, you can talk to them about your own journey and your own battle. You know, you are a warrior, and you have a special gift that you can offer to people in struggle who are feeling incredibly hopeless and who are feeling like they can never escape and then they can never overcome, and they're feeling the shame and the loneliness and the despair that comes with what your struggle is. And you can talk to them in a way that is incredibly unique to you, that I can't, because that is not my struggle. I can speak to them from my place of struggle, but he in that way is a wounded soldier, and he has that power to heal. And I loved as I was talking to him, his face kind of lit up, like I have a special mission here. Not like, he was glad he had gone through the hell that he had been through, but again, it was making his own mission something sacred that he could then turn to the glory of God. And I mean, that is a beautiful thing. All right, so I wanted to share with you, this is on my desk. This is one of my guiding statements. And this sort of speaks to quite a bit of what I've been saying so far. This is by Pema Chodron. She's a Buddhist nun. It's this. It says, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It is a relationship of equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. So what this precludes is that we have to have just a ton of courage to be able to look at our own darkness. If we're running from that, we are not going to have a high tolerance for sitting with others in theirs. And so that means there's a lot of personal work that needs to be done, which is difficult. It's a struggle. I certainly learned early on that it's kind of funny, I chuckle that I don't know if I would have opted, if I would have had the courage to do the work that I do if I knew what it was going to cost me in my own journey to learn about my own pain and my own struggle. Because I had learned quite early and quickly to just make that go away and not feel it. But consequently what it did, if I don't feel my own, I don't have the capacity to feel yours. Yours reminds me of mine. I don't want to think about mine. And so anyhow, when I walked down this road and I started this journey, all of a sudden it became very obvious that my work first would be within myself, and as I was able to gain an increased capacity to look at my own healing and experience that my healing that comes certainly by the grace of God, that I could have this intensely increased capacity to have compassion on those around us, on me. And again, that is not just something specific to my journey. It's something that each of us can do. So, to go along with this, I was just reading this actually I just read yesterday, a little story about a mom and a dad who had sent their little girl to school, and there was a lot of strict instructions to make sure you come straight home, no, don't stop anywhere, because they were worried about her. She's a little gal. And one day she was 5 minutes late, and then she was 10 minutes late, and then she was 15 minutes late, and the parents started worrying that, she was tiny little girl. And she finally rolls in, and mom and dad are pretty frantic. They're like, "Where have you been?" Very, very nervous. And she's like, "Oh, Mommy, I was walking home just like you said, and little Amy was sitting on her front doorstep crying because she had lost her doll." And so mom and dad kind of look at each other, and they're like, "So you stopped to help Amy find her doll?" She said, "No, Mommy, I stopped to help Amy cry." And I love that story because it kind of takes us back to this idea that there are going to be times, and probably quite a few times, where we as community really and truly cannot fix the thing that the other is experiencing. Nobody in my circle as a 19-year-old young college student could fix my parents' marriage. But they could stop and sit on the front doorstep and help me cry. And sometimes that is what we each need. That makes our pain bearable. And it helps us feel that we are not alone. And it also puts us in touch with God's love for us through the association of others who He brings into our paths to comfort us. And that is our work. And that is our capacity. That's what we can do. And so as I was thinking about these things, I was brought back to the greatest example of all, which is our Savior Jesus Christ and His earthly ministry. And I was really pondering my relationship with Him. And I was pondering what draws me to Him. That I was kind of thinking about this idea of the resurrected Savior and His power and glory and, all-knowingness and all of these things which I know and I love. And yet at the same time, I was really struck by the fact that what draws me to my Savior isn't those things as much as His willingness to come down and feel what I feel. That He chose not to be identified by His power and glory, but He chose to be identified by His kindness and by His compassion and by His desire to just be with the common people and to love others and to have these one-on-one conversations. It even occurred to me the beauty of this idea that when Mary and Martha came running to Him because of the death of Lazarus, He knew what He had the power to do, And yet before he even did that, what did he do? He stopped to help them cry. In his case, he could fix it. In our cases, we can't. But in all of the cases, we can stop and help others cry, just like Jesus Christ did. So his ministry was defined by his compassion. And our ministries can be defined by our compassion to others. We find our greatest wounding in this life, interestingly enough, in relationship, but we also find our greatest capacity to heal through relationship and to come closer to God through that healing by showing that compassion in relationships that we have with others. And I say these things in Jesus Christ's holy name, amen.